First of all, thanks for having me here today. I appreciate it. Look forward to today. Just want to, in the 8 years that I've been in office here, a number of things that we've gotten done, signed into law, major piece of legislation, between working on things regarding that most recently got signed into law, mental health. First time that our state has done a major mental health initiative in the state's history. I was the prime sponsor of that legislation that got signed into law as part of our budget this year. Looking at legislation that helped bring the Acero project here to northeastern Pennsylvania. One of the, talking about the environmental, the green revolution and clean energy jobs and what that looks like in northeastern Pennsylvania. Getting credit from the White House to Congressman Cartwright, Senator Casey, to Republicans, Democrats, all across the board of meeting clean energy initiatives going on here in northeastern Pennsylvania, to looking at the way our roads are paved and the materials used on our roadways. You look at it, I've been involved in many substantial pieces of legislation, including our Welfare to Work initiative, trying to limit people who cross state lines, but also trying to incentivize breaking that cycle of poverty. Of people who were making $12.75 an hour being able to receive a child care subsidy, but when they make $13 an hour, they lose that entire subsidy. So, that being my first piece of legislation signed into law in 2015 to help streamline and make sure that people could actually climb up the ladder and build that middle class so it wasn't an all or nothing type mentality. You look at the issues that I've been involved in our finance committee, in our health committee, you name it. I've been an active legislator who's not afraid to be involved, to work with whoever is the right people to work with to try to navigate the system. Obviously, some major stuff I'm working on right now, mental health stuff, that was a big initiative that got done this year. Working on the community solar initiative, which is getting close to potentially getting done in the next couple of weeks, hopefully. I'm sorry, my phone is somehow talking to me. I must have bumped it while we're talking. I apologize. But also our Vet Connect legislation, which is the single largest combination of working with our veterans organizations and government programs that we have here, that we've worked with the Wolf administration, one vote away from getting signed into law. So just a number of significant pieces of legislation, and the gift ban, of course, which you guys have written about recently as well, that I've been the prime sponsor of navigating that system of trying to get it through the legislature. So those are the things I have been working on and continue to work on, and look forward to continuing that work.
Let's start off with the 2020 election and the administration of elections in Pennsylvania. Looking back at the 2020 election, how do you think that was conducted, and what do you think about moving forward with how the state should conduct elections?
Yeah, so I think, you look at what happened in 2020, right? And there's a lot of things that happen on both sides that I think was very frustrating to both Republicans and Democrats, right? When you look at there being private funding of election, money coming into specific counties, specific areas, that's being paid for privately. I think, just from an objective lens, that's not right? If it was, this happened to be, what they refer to as the Zucker bucks, right? But if it was, if it was the Koch brothers putting money into conservative areas, it's just not the right way for elections to be funded or things to get done. The Supreme Court case in PA that led up to the 3-day extension and those types of issues, I think it's what's really frustrating to people. You look and say, here are the rules, we set the law, here's the boundaries. We as lawmakers and legislators, in conjunction with the governor, obviously divided government that we had that when we passed the 2019 legislation, Act 77, that was carefully negotiated, worked on to get to that point. I voted for that legislation. As we move forward, when you have the goalposts changing midway through the election, 2 months before it, it leads to discomfort and distrust. And we have to rebuild that confidence and that trust in our system, I think, by eliminating those private dollars, working towards putting more money of state dollars into to make sure that elections can be held fairly, freely done, and getting it out equally among a per population, per capita basis to our counties is the right way for it to be funded by the public, not by private entities. So there's a lot of things that are built into that, but I think I don't think there's a question, Joe Biden won the election, but it's one of those things that all the mistrust of things that were going around at that time led a lot of people to be frustrated over the process. And if we can't agree on the rules and the process, there are people that are going to have frustrations with the results. And I think that's what we saw in 2020.
So you blame the state Supreme Court for that?
No, I think that was part of it. I don't think that's the only piece of it that caused mistrust, right? Obviously, you had a lot coming from the top talking about, what's going on with the election. But when you're dealing with people changing the rules, I think the Supreme Court had a major blow to trust in the election. When, I don't think they objectively, I still have a major issue with their decision. I have a bigger problem with what their decision was in January, looking at the way they resolved the Brewster case about allowing each county to decide how to count ballots. I think that's an equally troublesome result. I think that's a wrong result, and I think we are going to come back and look at that PA Supreme Court decision, allowing that counties can determine how to count ballots individually. What stops a more conservative county from saying we're not counting any mail ballots because we think that these are illegal or unconstitutional, versus saying we're going to count these or not count these. I think it's one of those things we need to get to the table and redefine what these rules are, because I think the PA Supreme Court has made a mess of this, the public trust being undermined in elections with some of these things. But it's happened on both sides, right? So it's not just one way or the other, but it's certainly frustrating.
Staying on the topic of voter trust in the system, you signed on to an amicus brief to the suit filed by the Texas Attorney General, which essentially would have tried to overturn the results in Pennsylvania. Given the timing of that, and I know it dealt with some of these same issues, but those issues could have been adjudicated separately. Why did you sign on to this bill, which in a way has fueled this ongoing mistrust in some quarters of the 2020 election and the system at large?
Well, the amicus brief is specific about not trying to overturn the election, because it actually does not call for that in the amicus brief. It doesn't say anything about overturning the election,
But the suit does.
But the amicus brief is separate than what the suit is, and the amicus brief is not on one side or the other. Actually, on the front page it says it's filed on behalf of plaintiffs and defendants. It's not asking for a particular result to come, but says if you're going to hear this case, we would like you to resolve these issues that we have in Pennsylvania. And at that point, it was looking like there was going to be potentially a larger suit going up to try to determine some of these extra legislative initiatives that were done outside of the legislative process and signed into law, bypassing the House, Senate, and signed by the governor. These rules that were created were not done through that and are beyond any scope of what could be read by the legislation itself. It literally substituted policy preferences of the legislature and substituted them with that of the PA Supreme Court. Objectively, that's wrong. We have co-equal branches of government. The judiciary is not in charge of putting policy decisions in. They're in charge of interpreting them. And they went far beyond the scope of what our law said. There was nothing about an extra 3 days. At that point in the legislative process, we were negotiating with the governor about passing a bill to address COVID issues that were going on, about moving up timelines, pre-canvassing. All that was in discussion. All of that was in the works. You can look at the legislative history. There was legislation moving at the time that had, if I'm not mistaken, had already passed the Senate and had moved to the House, and we were going to be voting on that in the next couple of days when the Supreme Court gave that decision. So instead of it being resolved by the people, by the people's branches, which is the legislature, right, the House of Commons and the upper house or the Senate, and then signed by a Democrat governor, we missed that opportunity. That specifically targeted those issues that were brought forward by the PA Supreme Court, saying, U.S. Supreme Court, if you're going to hear this case, we want you to look at these issues as well that we believe are outside of the Constitution, that says that the state legislatures shall determine the time, place, manner, restrictions of elections. That is not what happened. It was not the state legislature that determined the time, place, manner with that specific ruling that happened in the PA Supreme Court. And that's to rebalance objectively the way elections should be maintained and monitored. And I think there's a lot of people, myself included, that look at that decision and say that decision was a partisan decision. It was beyond the pale of constitutionality and was not done appropriately. And I signed that amicus brief because that's specifically what that was about. It didn't comment about the underlying suit about Texas v. Pennsylvania. It was about our specific issue that we as a legislative branch had with our judicial branch stepping in and usurping our authority. Beyond that, our only authority is to start impeaching judges. And is that the next appropriate step for us to be taking? I don't know the answer to that. I don't think so, because we have policy differences. But if the legislative branch check on the judiciary is an impeachment process, and that's our only branch, trying to get a higher court to say what these guys did wasn't right, that is the step that we can take that's short of taking the ultimate level of trying to impeach judges. So if our U.S. Supreme Court and federal courts can look at that and say, yes, in our federal constitution, time, place, manner restrictions are left up to the state legislatures, that was superseded.
And I guess we're going, because there's a case along those lines before the U.S. Supreme Court now.
Correct, yeah.
North Carolina, isn't it?
I think you're right.
Now, along those lines, that case pending before the Supreme Court I believe it would give the legislatures the final say on awarding the electors to the Electoral College. Do you support that position, and would you support
I
in
don't.
the next election?
Well, so in our state constitution, we have a contested elections clause. I think it's Article 7, Section 13, if I'm not mistaken, that it pretty much says that if there's a contested election, it goes to a court system. So that would be against our PA constitution, right? We would obviously have to grapple with that if that happened.
Mm-hmm.
But our system is set up, the law is that in Pennsylvania, that the legislature is not involved in awarding the electors. So, that is not where the law is. That is not what I support. I do think that is, once again, trying to find that balance in the right way. I think both sides have been wrong in this. Mm-hmm. I think the extremes have been, speaking in their own silos instead of actually bringing people together to talk about what's right and what's wrong. And so, that to me is just beyond what I think our founding fathers saw or thought. I think that's beyond what we should be doing.
And regarding the administration of future elections, what changes would you like to see, regarding mail-in ballots, drop boxes, those issues?
Yeah, so drop boxes are another thing that aren't in the law, right? That we allowed for drop boxes to be at a county election bureau or at a county courthouse. This drop box, once again, is another thing that is beyond what is actually in the written law. When we passed that, there was no thought that there would be drop boxes wherever. We passed legislation to put guidelines on that it was going to be based on population. For every, let's say, 50,000 people, you're allowed a drop box. So in Luzerne County, you could put out, several drop boxes in different areas. But, that they couldn't be on every street corner. We all have a mailbox somewhat near all of our homes that you can walk to. You can put it out at your own personal mail. That for these to be secured is the other thing, right? To make sure that that we've already seen people that have dropped off multiple ballots. It's happened in Lackawanna County. It's happened here in Luzerne County in our most recent election that people walked in with multiple ballots and were notified by the sheriff that you can't do that. So making sure that those guidelines the law is only as good as you enforce it. So that's some of the things looking at that specifically. I had one other thing I wanted to say and it slipped my mind here.
I guess because the Supreme Court has allowed the county boards to do this, you would have to pass more legislation detailing how it should be done.
And we have passed that too, right? It has been vetoed by the governor. And actually the governor came back and said, maybe there was some good stuff in that legislation, this included, of one of the things that the governor actually commented on. But one other thing I think with the mail ballots, I think that it's something that, they're pretty easy to sign up for, that you can go online, register for it, sign up for it. I think the idea that they're constantly being sent out. Now, I've talked to many people who have gotten them that have never requested them, don't understand why they're coming to them. So
Are they getting applications? Are they getting actual ballots?
Actual ballots. I know that there's a difference between it. I understand that. But there are people that objectively, once again, this is me talking to constituents and trying to get their understanding of people who came to me and have said, I have never done this. People that I consider to be pretty sophisticated voters that
So the county is sending mail-in ballots to people who didn't even request them?
people are saying, I haven't requested this and I'm receiving it, and what do I do? And once again, I take these people at their word. That I've also got a mail-in ballot that got, as you know, they're pre-addressed, right? They're printed right on there, that got returned to a constituent of mine that said that this address is undeliverable after sending, and she received that after the primary election already happened. Actually, it was this year. And said, how is this address undeliverable? It's pre-addressed. So I think there's some issues, but the way I think you try to resolve that is that you actually have people who want to receive it actually go and physically sign up for it, whether it's annually or every 2 years, instead of just having this endless list of things that get mailed out. I think that's a better way of helping track the system, make sure that people are requesting them, they get into the right hands. People obviously move and don't always update their information, so I think it's just a way that we can better help streamline this. And I think that's a way that objectively we can work through some of those issues to make sure that people are receiving the ballots they requested and they get to where they want, so that they know, I'm expecting this ballot, it should be coming, and to be aware of that.
And do you support any changes in the law that would make it easier for the county boards to count the mail-in ballots in a more efficient manner?
Yeah, I support pre-canvassing. I think I think there's just something about Election Day being the Super Bowl, right? When we go to bed at night, and I talked about this back in 2020, that God forbid we go to sleep on election night thinking one person won and another person actually did after all the mail-ins are counted. That's what happened, and so that's not good for our system. That results in and of itself helps to make people be questionable of what's going on. There's something to me that is wholly about Election Day, and this might just be me as somebody who's involved in government and politics, that when you go to bed on election night, you want to know the future, right? I'm up all night watching the results. I want to know who won, and not knowing when you go to sleep on election night, there's just something inherently un-American about it to me, right? There's something that is about when you go to sleep on election night, you know the direction that we're going in the next morning when you wake up. Who got elected, who won. I think that takes away from our system, takes away from people. And once again, I do think it creates questions in people's minds about results. When we don't have the results on election night, which is what we've been used to our whole lives pretty much. Certainly my whole life, maybe except for Bush v. Gore in 2000, right?
Why has the legislature been unable to pass that?
We have passed it packaged with other pieces of legislation of a give and take type initiative. Part of it, I was hoping that we'd get it in as part of the private funding of election issue. Now we put some other money in for machines that you saw our county is purchasing for some of those things, but it has really become this, if we're going to do this, let's create some balance. To me, that's a nonpartisan issue. I just think it's a right and wrong issue. Knowing who won elections when you go to bed on election night, I just think that that's part of our American system, that political junkies like me, we want to know. I stay up all night, waiting to see those results.
My understanding is the biggest problem with getting those results quicker is that they can't start actually
Correct.
counting until after the polls close.
Which is why we call that pre-canvassing, right? So that's...
They can open the envelopes, they just can't count the votes.
Correct. So when I talk about pre-canvassing, I include that in what I'm saying. So just so we're talking the same vocabulary here. I do think that we should have pre-canvassing, and whether that's 3 days or whatever it is, but making sure the other piece of it is also the restrictions along with that, making sure that those results don't leak as well, right? Because there's something, I think, once again, you shouldn't start getting election results. You get your exit polls and things like that, but results should start coming in before.
And there are states that do that, like Florida.
Correct. And I think there's ways of doing that exactly as you're pointing out. It's not just a Democrat state, a Republican state, red, blue. It's a mixture of how states do this. And I just think that that's the right way. We should be doing pre-canvassing. There's something about election day, election night, that we should know the results of who our elected officials are.
I think we should move on from the voting. We've got a couple other issues we need to cover.
The U.S. Supreme Court again has made abortion front and center a top issue. Just tell us what your position and your voting record is there.
Yep. So I've never supported an outright ban on abortion. Never supported it. Never have. I do think that there are, first of all, should be restrictions, first of all, regarding, the health of the mother, rape, incest, those types of issues. But the other big one that I'm a believer on is viability, right? So when we look at what viability means, when is a child able to live outside the womb and actually survive, right? So what is that objective standard? Somewhere in the 20-week time frame. And I voted for this before, to move from 24 weeks to 20 weeks, which objectively, that ties into what many of our surrounding states do, and states that are probably more left-leaning than we are. Putting that into a 20-week time period aligns us with many of those surrounding states. So that viability is, to me, what is important when I'm making decisions, that 18 to 20-week period, and making sure that if there's any issues even beyond that, to make sure that if there's health risks or anything like that, that's protected as well.
And how did you vote on the constitutional amendment regarding abortion?
So I actually had a health issue that day with my daughter. I wasn't there that day. I would not have voted for it, but there was an issue with it with my daughter that was pressing that day. I was actually there that morning and had to leave in an emergency, that I was not there that morning.
And why would you not have voted for it?
I don't agree with it, right? So it's one thing about talking about taxpayer funding of abortion, but saying that there's no other right. You're telling me that a woman who, her life is at risk doesn't have a right to an abortion. I don't agree with that. And I think the way that the phrasing is, I just don't agree with the constitutional clause that was there.
Let's move on to taxes. I guess the legislature agreed to a plan to reduce the corporate income tax. Is that something you're in favor of?
Yeah, I voted for that. I support that. Lowering the CNI, that's one of the things. I've served on our finance committee for my entire time in the legislature. I'm our subcommittee chair for tax policy. So I'm really pleased with what we've done with our tax policy in general this year. There's some things we didn't get done, like property tax, and I'll dive into that here in a little bit. But looking at the number one thing when states look, or businesses look at different states on where they want to locate, they look at Pennsylvania and see 9.99. It is a sticker shock, and it's just something that businesses won't even look at any of our other policies, our workforce development issues, our technology investments, our credits, our tax credits or other tax incentives we have because of the sticker shock of 9.99 being the second highest in the country. Now, lowering that over time to 4.99 puts us on a trajectory now of showing business predictability. We are lowering this rate, it's in law, it's in statute. We are going in that direction to be more attractive to these businesses. If we're going to bring in good paying jobs, we need to make sure that we are a place where business can thrive. And it's a balance. Labor and industry doesn't exist without labor or industry. You need the two coming together in order to make that happen. Proud to work with our partners in labor. I'm proud to work with our friends in business as well to understand the issues they're facing. As we're looking at recovering out of COVID, this is probably the biggest issue of what we're seeing between supply chain issues, workforce issues. There are real issues in our economy right now, and this isn't going away. This is going to be here for at least the foreseeable future. Be it a year, be it 18 months, there's a lot of instability in our economy, at least from my perspective. I'm very concerned about what that looks like a year from now. Is inflation going to start coming down? Are we going to start addressing some of those supply chain issues? Are we going to see those issues start coming together? I'm concerned. I genuinely am concerned that those issues are going to lead to businesses shrinking, to the economy shrinking, to workforce being laid off. With things like this, there are opportunities for other businesses to grow, but it doesn't happen overnight. There's going to be growing pains. And so I'm concerned about what those growing pains look like as we're trying to recover and work our way out of COVID. But it doesn't happen overnight. But just getting back in, want to address quickly, we got our small business tax package done as part of that initiative. Like-kind exchanges were a part of that. Bonus depreciation was a part of that law that got signed in. The third one that's part of the small business tax package is slipping my mind right now, but I'll think of it probably in a minute while you're asking me about something else. But that also got signed in as part of that business package. So not only were we addressing the C corporations, the large businesses, and lowering their rate, while also trying to make sure that our small businesses coming out of this have the same opportunities that are through our Internal Revenue Code, our IRC, Our small mom and pops are the ones who typically didn't have access to the PPP funds or didn't have the ability to write these loans because it's small family businesses trying to figure out these very complex grant programs established by the federal government. Those are the guys that missed out the most on these fundings. These large corporations, they got the money that they applied for, that they were able to figure out because they have these large corporate teams and lawyers and accountants to figure this out. Our small mom and pops did not. And so being able to actually give them a tax package that's going to help them get on their feet and actually adjust their business going forward to, when you talk about like-kind exchanges, so, when you look at a business that's trying to expand or something, that you can, be able to write off the from one property go into a slightly larger property, we weren't aligned with our federal code on that. Now we incentivize businesses to do that. With bonus depreciation, we are now incentivizing businesses who reinvest in their business and don't take money out to pay themselves or to pay the ownership or their shareholders or whatever it might be. We're now incentivizing them to keep money in the business to grow it. These are the right steps about getting into the economy. We weren't doing that before. So for our small businesses, I'm proud. I just received, I've been notified that I'm about to receive the Guardian of Small Business Award. I have a lifetime rating of 100% of supporting our small businesses in the legislature. I'm proud of that record. Those are the small mom and pops that I think about when you look at my district in the area I represent on the west side. We have a lot of small mom and pops. We have a lot of businesses that are family-run businesses that have been there a long time, and supporting them and getting them to grow and to be able to grow their business and not have to pull money out, but can actually make those decisions to grow coming out of this. Those are the things we need coming out of COVID. Last thing that was part of that package was also about putting additional money in for our property taxes. I was the sponsor of the legislation that was to grow our property tax rent rebate program. Representative Schnee and I were the two that sponsored it together about trying to boost that using some of the money from the federal government. So that money actually went to give a $500 bonus to people who were our lowest income earners. It graduated its way down as well. It wasn't just $500 for anybody, but for the thresholds that we have for our property tax rent rebate program. So, helping keep people in their homes while we're going through inflation, our seniors. If we start seeing the housing market is starting to cool off. We see that a little bit. But as inflation is hurting people on fixed incomes, if we start having people lose their homes and can't afford their taxes, this economic issue is going to bubble up and become significantly worse. Talk about what we saw in 2008. This could be substantially worse if people start losing their homes due to inflation. Seniors are the ones who are being squeezed the most right now, who unfortunately don't have that extra income because they're living on those fixed incomes. So I'm glad we got that done, because keeping people in their homes that own their homes right now is critical to making sure our economy continues to move forward. So obviously more that I'd like to do on property taxes. I'm a strong believer in getting away from a property tax system for our education system to have more stable funding, more equitable funding, not based on the value of your home, but actually the income you have. Property taxes predating, income taxes, right? Where we had the tax assessors go and say you have this much land.
How do you want to do that?
Well, I think it has to be done through income tax and sales tax, right? They're the only true revenue resources that can reach those numbers when you're talking about 14 billion or some sizable number. We passed the homestead exemption that was on the ballot a few years ago. I'm gonna guess that was 2017. Maybe it was 2018. That went on for a voter referendum as a constitutional amendment to allow homesteads to go from a 50% reduction up to a 100% reduction. I think our focus right now, because of the economic issues I was talking about, should be on focusing on that homestead exemption. Keeping people in their homes at a time where you can take into account people's income versus not taking into account people's income, just the house they're living in. It's a snapshot of time of when they might have been earning. And if people fall behind on those payments, we're in for a rough road if that happens. So I'm really proud of being the prime sponsor of that legislation and getting that done as part of the budget that was included in that tax package.
Regarding the fair funding formula, the governor has tried to put more state funds into the pockets of the school districts through that fair funding formula.
Well, it's a couple of things, right? The new dollars that are allocated going forward have been put into that fair funding formula, going back to when it was first adopted 6 years ago, 7 years ago, whatever that might have been.
What do you think about Governor Wolf's push to try to put push more state money to the districts so they don't rely on property taxes?
Well, I'm going to get to that. So the formulas play a big role into that, right? So the whole harmless goes back to the 90s of how education was funded and student population back then. So old dollars pre-existing that the fair funding formula change still get run out in exactly the same formula. So, when we're looking at the new dollars that have come in, only the new dollars beyond when the fair funding formula was adopted are going into that formula, right? We haven't gone back to start clawing back some of those old harmless dollars, which has been a fight in the legislature every year since we've been there. Whether we start by going 5%, 10%, 15%, and start year over year making those adjustments, because districts in our area are the ones who are being hurt by that old formula and not running it through our fair funding formula. Now, the other issue, which I think you're alluding to, is also that level up funding. The level up funding is for the 100 most underpaid school districts, and I think that's what your question was asking, and if I'm wrong, just correct me, but about giving them a boost of putting significant dollars into that up to what those 100 underfunded schools are. So I've supported that initiative. It's been a huge boost to several school districts in our area. It's been a huge boost to Wyoming Valley West, looking at the issues that they were dealing with in regard to budget, having a negative fund balance last year, to now having that boost and having no tax increase and balancing the budget this year is because of things like the level up funding, where they have been historically underfunded. So that's a huge issue. How do the dollars get distributed? Typically, the school districts in Western Pennsylvania, you could take a band and draw it pretty much across the state, that everything in the north central to the west benefits from that hold harmless formula. Us, through the Poconos, through Monroe County, through Berks County, all down through southeastern Pennsylvania, are the ones who are hurt by the old funding formula. So, I'll continue to push, but it's simply a mathematics problem. There are not enough legislators in this portion of the state who are hurt by it versus the number who are benefited by the hold harmless. So trying to get a little bit of starting to say, listen, we know this is not right. And I think even Western legislators could agree to that, of doing a transition process of moving those hold harmless dollars over time into the fair funding formula is the way to get this done. Whether that means 2.5% a year, or 2% a year, or 5% a year, I think it has to be small bits that will over time help put more money into those schools. Once again, our taxpayers are the ones who are being hurt by it, but it's a simple mathematics problem. 102, 26, and 1. In order to get something signed into law, 102 state representatives, 26 state senators, 1 governor's signature. Unless you're looking at a veto override, and we're nowhere close to those numbers to get something like that done. So to get those magic 102, 26, and 1, it's not an easy process to get to those numbers.
And regarding education, what do you think about school choice and Mastriano's education plan?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of Mastriano's education plan, right? I think we have existing dollars. We've actually increased our EITC, our OSTC dollars that we've done historically year over year. That also got historic funding in this year's budget. I think that is not where most people are, and making sure, there's systems and things that we can do. We're seeing change happen in regard to some of our charter schools and things like that can become more efficient and help to grow our education system and make it better. But I am not a fan of that model.
The environment, what do you think of the state of the environment in Pennsylvania, and does the state need to do more to clean up some of the old mine waste?
Well, I'm proud of being nailing what I think is one of the biggest projects here in northeastern Pennsylvania in regard to the Harry E. Colliery in Sawyersville. That was one of the early initiatives that I started working on to land that getting done. I'm proud of the work and effort that I put into that in my office, working with Sawyersville and Senator Udicek to get that project done. There's more that needs to go there. I've been an advocate for increasing the funding to help do that remediation. We have a waste coal credit that exists at the state level. It was the first time, and actually, if you look at the federal government, when they talk about abandoned mines, they actually talk about Sawyersville, Pennsylvania. You've probably seen Bobby Hughes has been down there from EPCAM a number of times testifying in front of the committee. That was the first time that a state put together a combination of state dollars with federal dollars to land an initiative like that. The issue of it just being so far away from these cogeneration plants that can actually process it, of actually being able to transport some of that waste coal into what we're doing. So that increasing those dollars, I've been an advocate of, I've been a co-sponsor of, I voted for it in the legislature. We need to keep going in that route because you can just look at Google Earth and you can see the orange water running off those waste coal piles, right? And if you look at what's going on with our permitting right now, the same federal permit that helped bring forward the grain tax, right? That the same thing that brought that forward, they're now studying abandoned mine drainage. So if we're looking at that eventually being implemented in our area, that's a significant burden that if it's done in the same model of local taxpayers picking up that burden, that's going to be significant here for the Wyoming Valley and Luzerne County. That's a big, big number. So as we try to make sure that we're doing more to remediate these sites, and I've already got my eyes set on another site that I've already begun doing some initial work on in Exeter, that's there as well, over sort of by, I guess, like near Fox Hill a little bit, I guess. Trying to get that, what they call the desert there, cleaned up. That is a priority that we've already begun having some meetings on that, because this Swearsville project, as you can see, I don't think residents ever thought it would start happening in their lifetimes. They've now removed about 20%, the closest to Murphy's Pub. You can look from the ball field and see that it's remediated. What was a mountain is now down to eye level. 7 acres is going to be actually donated to the borough for being a park. Really pleased of the package we put together to make that happen. And like I said, it's talked about as being a premier project at the federal level. You know, we should be proud of that. You know, I know that you guys have done some coverage on that before when Bobby goes down and when others speak about it, but I'm proud of that initiative. And that was not an easy one to get done, and one that I don't think people thought would actually happen. I think they said, "You're nuts, kid. You're never going to get that done." And we helped navigate the system and get that one done.
What do you want to see do you support any reforms to government ethics, transparency, and where do you stand on issues like per diems, gerrymandering,
Yep.
size of the legislature?
Yeah, I'm the only legislator from northeastern Pennsylvania to vote to reduce the size of the legislature. I am the sponsor of the gift ban legislation. I'm a co-sponsor of the redistricting reform initiative that's put forward by Fair District Pennsylvania. You know, government reform is one of the reasons I ran originally. I don't take per diems. I do actual expenses. So, you know, the amount that I get, I historically, and actually a couple of years ago, you guys at Citizens Voice wrote a piece on me being the most frugal legislator. As my staff knows, I'm cheap. And, you know, I really do try to make sure that we spend taxpayer dollars wisely. I'm proud of being efficient, being the most cost-efficient legislator. That was, I think, 2020 that was. But I'm usually in the top 5, certainly in the top 10 year over year on costs. And I'm proud of the way I run my office and conduct myself. It's taxpayer dollars, it's not my dollars. I might have access to those dollars, but I'm proud to return money every year, significant amounts of money, to the Treasury that doesn't get spent on behalf of my office.
You want to ban the use of the per diem?
Yeah, so I actually think we should be doing actual expenses. That's my personal opinion. I would support getting rid of the per diems to move into an actual expense. I don't think, you know, we already get paid a salary. We're expected to show up to work. I do, you know, mileage is in the Constitution, which is something we should receive. It's in our PA Constitution. So mileage is certainly something I'd like to see kept. But I think when we're talking about expenses of staying overnight in Harrisburg or what that is, people shouldn't be, you know, using their per diems to buy themselves a home. I think that's wrong. You know, using taxpayer dollars to eventually be what is your own home. I just don't think that's right. That's not what that's intended for. And so getting away from that to actual expenses helps alleviate a lot of those problems.
Now, you were a proponent of term limits.
Yep.
Have you changed your view
No,
on that?
I was a co-sponsor of the 8-year term limit. I still am. When that came forward a couple years ago, it never came up for a vote. You know, still support that.
Where are you? How many terms have you been in so far?
This is 8 years.
You're at 8 years now.
I'm at 8 years. Here's the thing, right? Our system is based on seniority in Pennsylvania. So our chairmanship, everything that is based on, rising through the ranks is based on seniority. And so if not everybody's playing by the same rules again, it's hurting our own area. So I'm now at the point where I very well will likely be a chairman next cycle. I looked at seniority list. I'm about number 30 in seniority in the legislature right now. You guys can see it in the number of retirements we've had this year, but that's been happening over a number of years here in Pennsylvania. To be able to step up and control policy of an entire state department or committee is pretty significant. And there's a lot of authority given to chairmen in our system, but that's based on a seniority role. So if not everybody's playing by the same rules of, okay, you're gonna do 8 years, and you're gonna, everybody needs to be playing by the same rules. If we change that, then that helps to make everybody to be a little bit more responsive to what's going on. I don't plan on serving forever. I don't plan on serving for, significantly much time longer, but I do plan on making sure that the trust that the voters have given me for the past 8 years, and I'll turn that into seniority to get real things and real solutions done of the things I've been working on but unable to get done in the past 8 years. Our Pennsylvania gun clause says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be questioned. That's much stronger than what we have at the U.S. Second Amendment law. So I just look at that of, if we are going to go down that path, first of all, we have to make sure that there is a true judicial process set up, because, one of the big things that I'm really proud of, the response, I started working on mental health legislation in schools 4 years ago when Parkland first happened. And nobody in the legislature, Republican or Democrat, was diving into this issue. Nobody was working on it. And so to dive in and to start working on it 4 years ago, and we actually had the vote scheduled that came out of committee. I don't remember if it was right before or right after the Uvalde shooting, but it was right around the same time that it came out of committee and was scheduled for a floor vote. You don't want to say, timing is good, because obviously you don't want to see anything like that ever happen. We don't hope for that, but we were able to take a situation and put significant dollars into making sure we're addressing mental health in our schools. We put a new $100 million school security funding, but for the first time in our state's history, this legislation now, it's House Bills 2022, 2023, 2024, one to create a training method, one to do a model curriculum, and then study and training, model curriculum, and then the third to actually provide funding. When I first started working on this, I was hoping to get one of the first two maybe done. We were able to get that done as part of the budget, doing mental health funding. Every single public school in Pennsylvania, all 500 school districts, got money to address mental health for their schools. And I'm proud of that, because that, it's been talked about, and you should see the emails I got calling me all sorts of funny things. I'd be happy to share with you after to read what people called me for trying to address mental health. It was some of the most absurd emails I've ever seen in my life of trying to make sure that people who need help, we're providing that help. And it gets very complicated when you get into a school setting of what we're doing there. So creating that system out of this is something that I'm really proud of, because it's going to really save lives here in Pennsylvania. I'm fully convinced of that. We created pilot funding to help get partners involved here that have not been historically involved here in Pennsylvania, as well as money to each school district. That to me is huge.
You mentioned mental health. First hospital in your district's going to be closing at the end of the month. What are your concerns over that, and what are you trying to do to replace that?
I have to be a little careful about some of the things I say, because there's stakeholders involved in this who are working on this. So I'm going to try to answer as best I can without saying anything that I shouldn't be saying. There are ongoing conversations between several different stakeholders and several of the different providers that are there, outpatient, inpatient, and the outpatient is a number of different programs, from the work programs to the home care programs type thing. There's a lot that's involved in that, including some of the Suboxone programs and others that are there. And I, at some point, I'm hoping we get a chance to talk a little bit about the opioid crisis as well. But there are a number of people. There's a number of them talking about some of the outpatient services. There are just a few talking about the inpatient services. I truly believe, I'm not sure if we're going to hit that end of October timeframe with the inpatient services. I'm cautiously optimistic that we will get something done soon, but the outpatient, we are in substantial conversations. I think we're getting there. and I really do hope that we're going to land something there. So I hope I did my best of answering that question. I'm sorry.
Pennsylvania is one of 20 states that hasn't raised its minimum wage above the federal rate, $7.25. What do you think about that?
Yep. Hang on a second. So we've done, there's been legislation back and forth. I voted for a minimum wage increase before to take it up to roughly $10 an hour. I think that's part of making sure we have a balance to this, right? Right now we see in the economy, people aren't typically being paid $7.25. Certainly not families, maybe some starter jobs for people coming out of high school. But, you know, that's something that I voted for before. I think it's got to be balanced to make sure that we're doing both something in the business world. We were looking at repealing some of the overtime regulations that came via executive order here in Pennsylvania and balancing that out with some minimum wage. That ended up blowing up at the last second, but that was something I supported and was moving through the legislature.
And what about legalizing recreational marijuana?
So where I think we are at with this process right now is that I think we have to be talking about decriminalization. What does that look like here in Pennsylvania? You know, I personally think that we have bigger fish to fry than marijuana here, and hopefully we'll lead into an opioid question here right after. I do want to talk about it, but I don't want to mix it in right now. But, you know, I think when you talk about should people be incarcerated for small amounts, for things like that, I think most people can objectively say, no, we have bigger fish to fry. And so when we talk, but we've been marketing that terribly to kids for decades. I think we need to redraw the line of, you know, what's okay and what's not. I personally don't have an issue with marijuana. I think it's a generational issue. I think people my age and, you know, typically don't care if you drink or you smoke marijuana. People typically don't care. Just don't be out there driving on the roads and being unsafe about it. So, you know, in sort of that balancing of what you're trying to do, moving towards decriminalization can eventually lead towards that legalization pathway, because you want to make sure that marijuana isn't laced with fentanyl or other things that can be incredibly dangerous. You know, you can see people who have passed away because of those cocktails of what it's mixed with. In and of itself, not going to overdose from marijuana, but, you know.
So by legalizing it, you do make it a safer product.
Correct.
And you can also generate revenue.
Correct.
And
I mean, the revenue, I think it was Eugene DePasquale who did the audit on that, or a report on that it could be roughly $600 million, give or take. So I think that's, you know, there's changes that we could be doing.
Yeah. And you mentioned the opioid crisis. What do you want to do about that?
Yeah, so thank you. You know, when I first came to the legislature, you know, nobody was really talking about heroin and opioids, right? It was something that I was very passionate about. Ed Gainey, the now mayor of Pittsburgh, and I formed the HOPE Caucus, the Heroin Opioid Prevention and Education Caucus. Ed and I led this through bipartisan negotiations to help create some solutions here in Harrisburg. Ed, who is still a very, very dear and close personal friend of mine, love Ed. I'm so happy for him there in Pittsburgh, and I think he's going to do a great job, a phenomenal job. Anyway, that he and I worked through this, and we had hearings on the governor's initiatives, what was being offered by DHS, by other federal funding that was coming through at the time, before it was, you know, something that was on the front of people's minds. Now it's hard to imagine a family that hasn't been touched by the opioid crisis, or a dear friend, or somebody within your personal network. It's hit all manners of life everywhere. I just spoke at somebody who died that I went to high school with just last week. It's near and dear to your heart, and I've lost a number of people that I went to high school with through this. So some of the things that we've done, you know, we created the emergency detox and stabilization units. We're now trying to market that to our hospitals to get them to open it up. Before, we had regulations that were reduced so that you could streamline some of this. So it wasn't that you needed to have separate everything, but have access to a lot of this. So that unfortunately changed during some regulations. We helped reduce some of those regulations to create this, that you can have emergency detox and stabilization. So when somebody needs help, they have somewhere to go. And I think we made a critical mistake, and I've been vocally critical of this. Myself, Representative Gainey, our entire HOPE caucus that had a hearing on this, of the governor's initiative of the Centers for Excellence, was a failed model, was not going to work. I hate to say I told you so, but I don't believe that model has been a successful model here in Pennsylvania. I think we should be putting those dollars that we have into places like the emergency detox and stabilization units. because that is someplace that you're typically losing money, when you're dealing with some of the methadone, Suboxone, and Vivitrol programs, those programs exist and are self-sustaining, separate from the federal pass-through dollars to the state. So, moving this to some of those emergency detox and stabilization units can really help make sure that when people need help, they have a place to go before they might be able to get into an inpatient program or an outpatient program. And that's something that is going to be, as the administration changes, I've butted heads with the governor on this a number of times. I just don't see eye to eye with him. I disagree with him wholeheartedly on his model that he's created here in Pennsylvania. This is going to be a model that I'm going to be talking about with whoever the next administration might be, that we look forward to working, changing this model, making sure that we get things done that's the right funding in the right place. And, I just think that we're missing a huge opportunity with what we can be doing.
Do you support legislation to prevent discrimination against LGBTQ and to guarantee same-sex marriage?
So I'm one of, if not the only Republican co-sponsor of that, and have been since my first day in office.
And the governor's race, are you backing Mastriano?
I haven't. I'm worried about my own race.
You don't have a preference? You wouldn't vote to support the Democrat?
I've not endorsed in other races. I'm here worried about my own.
How much money do you expect to spend on your campaign?
We'll see.
Are you getting funding from the state GOP?
No, I'm not. I'm self-supporting.
Have there been any discussions about debate?
I'm sorry, I didn't
Has
hear
there
you.
been any discussions about debate?
There has not. Working on these decarbonization efforts, I've been one of our state's leader on that. I'm trying to move towards that. Nisero is a big piece of that, moving towards our decarbonization efforts of actually reducing carbon emissions from gasoline and being able to do that. In some circles it's controversial, but we've gotten applause even from John Fetterman, who has actually weighed in to say, this is checking the boxes of, what we should be doing. President Biden's team has weighed in support. We've really gotten some significant support on this. That would really be a major key piece to getting to that 2050 climate initiative. So, moving towards those pathways, I'm currently the Pennsylvania appointee to our Legislative Energy and Horizon Institute, which is about looking at the future of energy and what we need to be doing. So, I'm one of these energy all the above guys. I also have the prime sponsor of the geothermal initiative here in Pennsylvania. The biggest solar initiative in Pennsylvania. One of the biggest, how to turn gasoline and actually, decarbonize some of our natural gas into a value-added product so that we're just not burning it in our homes, but could actually be used for our current economy. I think that's huge. When you talk about lowering, by meeting roughly 5% of our 2050 initiative that's been laid out by President Biden, 5% of it through Nisero is pretty significant. And that's happening right here in northeastern Pennsylvania. So when we talk about jobs of the future, working with our trades, working with our unions, I'm proud to have their support because we've worked together to do significant pieces of legislation here. So, I'm endorsed by the AFL-CIO. I've been endorsed by a number of our trades partners, and I'm proud to work in that space and to do that.
Yeah, PSEA endorsed
Yes.
you? They normally do. But that's kind of a rarity for a Republican as well.
That is.